Well, well, well. It is spooky season, and again you've been brought forth to jobbers and goons to see some fun, scary content. And today we have one of the ultimate symbols of peace and hope in all of fiction, Superman, taking on one of the most infamous villains to ever exist, Pennywise. If Superman was forced to confront a looming true form Pennywise, who is making his way towards the DC multiverse. Could the Man of Tomorrow get the job done? We're going to solve that question here, but before we do, like and subscribe. We're on the road to 30K. As much likes and comments as you can give helps my channel get out into the algorithm and grow in general. If you want the scaling for Pennywise, Superman, and access to characters like that, full scaling servers, hit me up on Discord to talk business. I'm also doing a UFC watch party today around 2 p.m. EST. Come through, I'm going to stream the fights and commentate over them, which should be hilarious. But without further ado, let's get into it. First, we will explore the nature and power of Pennywise because, in my opinion, a lot of people are not too caught up on how strong he gets, especially in the novels, and they need to be when we do a matchup like this. So, what does true form Pennywise entail? Most know him for his portrayal through the TV shows and the movies. However, it is important to note that this is simply a mere fraction of Pennywise, an avatar. You see, where Pennywise comes from is far beyond the universe and even multiverse. What we see is aspects of him interacting with Earth. However, outside of Earth is obviously the universe. Outside of this universe, infinite amount of timelines. Within these timelines, everything stacks, with atoms being like eternity to everything else, and there being an infinite transcendence just within a regular existence, with one blade of glass or grass being said to contain aspects like multiverses. Now, this is insane to think about, but it also ties into the concept of size. The concept of size is the idea that no matter how big you get, no matter how infinite, eternal you are, something will always transcend you. Something will always be bigger. Size will triumph. And our mind is not made to encapsulate the idea of never-ending transcendences. However, this concept of size is one of the concepts contained within the Dark Towers. The Dark Towers being the place that contains all stories, non-stories, ideas, and ideas never thought of. It is the balance of the creations of Stephen King's work, with Stephen King himself in the real world being designated as one of the timelines and stories within the Dark Towers itself, and Stephen King himself is a character within his own multiverse. As the author, he has constructed a verse built in the Dark Towers that easily has high outer scaling. However, the outside of the Dark Towers, which, by the way, I will acknowledge, kind of breaks the brain, and it doesn't make sense for something to be outside of an idea containing the concept of size. However, King made his horror with the idea of it being so extreme in power, it's too horrifying to try to encapsulate, imagine, or apply any logic to. It is also beyond logic, which explains its extreme potency. Now, the Dark Towers, they are contained on the back of Matern at one point, the Matern being the sibling to Pennywise. He resides within the void and keeps the creation of the Dark Towers from falling into the primordial soup of the void. Outside of the void is nothing, and beyond nothing is the Badlands, the land where true form Pennywise resides. From here, he is the one who eats compared to Matern, his brother, who is the one who watches. And as the one who eats, he actually, for a long time, really minded his own business. However, upon discovering new ideas and concepts to him, for example, he did not know what dimensions were. He did not know what abstract ideas like emotions were. He did not know what logic was, imagination was. All of these things were so far beneath him, he could not fathom them. So he had to shrink himself down, dimensionalize himself at a lot of points, in order to fit inside of creation within the Kingverse. And once inside the Kingverse, he began to feed on the greatest snack he had ever encountered: pure, unfiltered hope and imagination, particularly of the youth of Earth, because the youth, believe in such fairy tales that make them more pure and raw in their ideas and imagination. It's just more potent. That became like a drug to Pennywise, and he would go on to try and consume it time and again. He would lose in many encounters, being as he was already coming into the game weakened and did not know how to engage on these very contained parameters. Eventually, he would go back to his own realm. Even Maturin states it is not reasonable to try and go there and win the fight because no one is beating Pennywise on his own turf. In fact, Stephen King himself says he has no way to stop Pennywise. Pennywise could even consume him. All of the stories, and is the scariest of the monsters within the verse. With Pennywise out of the way, as the horrifying high outer to boundless consumer of all things, including hope and imagination. Who do we have next to stand against him? We have Superman. Now, why would we put Superman against such a dastardly figure? Well, in my opinion, this may be one of the greatest battles Superman could ever encounter, and one he has been building up to his whole life. So let's get into what he brings to the table. Superman, especially in recent comics, is as strong as he has ever been in the comics, which puts him above insane iterations like Post-Crisis, New 52, Rebirth. All these things are combined and not as strong as the current Superman. You could even, if you want to, get as wild as putting in beings like Cosmic Armor Superman. And this is very reasonable because Cosmic Armor Superman was an armor that contained part of the story of Superman. And Superman is in his entirety in his current state. So it is reasonable to argue that this statement would also apply to Cosmic Armor Superman. But back to the point. Superman is the embodiment of hope within the DC multiverse. Now, I know there's been some extreme downplay on DC from sites like Versus Battle, I think, that says it's like multiversal, which is crazy. But DC has realms that go beyond all dimensions, space, and time. They go beyond even stories and retcons. They have lands of narrations itself, which gets transcended multiple times. Ideas, myths, and archetypes. But even the dream structure of DC cosmology has outerversal transcendences within it. So you have a high outer to boundless cosmology laying beneath you in DC. And we need to talk about that, why that is very important. Superman, as the embodiment of hope, as the first superhero, has been the archetypal symbol of good throughout DC that has been the bedrock of which most narrations and stories have laid. Superman can take on the embodiment of absolutely destruction and doomsday, as Doomsday himself is the strongest foe Superman has ever faced, which includes outerversal beings such as Darkseid. Now, Doomsday, who scales even to the strongest Hellords to ever exist in DC, Superman can go toe-to-toe with him and has done so time and again, proving even beyond logic he can stand up to Doomsday as the symbol of hope. On top of this, he can take on the army of the Great Evil Darkness and even fight back against the power of Pariah, who is being powered by the Great Darkness. This is important because Pariah, who has encountered all of these ungodly abstracts, we're talking Darkseid, Necron, Empty Hand, all these powerhouses, not to mention he's experienced the Great Darkness itself. All of these powers he's been subjected to, and even still, he states that none of these powers are as strong as the power of hope. Let's refer to Dr. Manhattan. Dr. Manhattan himself, one who dabbles in powers that scale to the source and have to do with source energy. The guy who turned off a white lantern like it was nothing, which is a creation buster in itself. In Sandman, during a deadly game of cosmic who is better, when faced with Oblivion, absolute nothingness, the end, the cosmic Armageddon. The answer to overcome this was hope, or Superman. Superman, by and far, throughout the decades, has been the greatest hope within the DC multiverse. A multiverse that is no slouch in terms of size of cosmology. This is very important, because like I said, Manhattan saw him and was entirely afraid because he couldn't really fathom what that hope meant to an extent. And because of that, just the fact that it was confusing source level beings, the fact that he's encountered source level power directly from the source, and it was not greater than his, All this points to the importance and the greatness and the grandeur of the power of the hope of Superman. And to conclude this section, I'm going to add a clip from my interview with Hulk and Superman writer Philip Kennedy Johnson, who described the power of both Hulk and Superman and explained how strong Superman is and what he's capable of, in my opinion, in a fantastic way. The Superman part? Okay. Superman is often compared to Hulk. And that's because, obviously, both are two of the strongest to ever exist in their verses. And I was curious, as someone who's one of the rare few in the world to actually write both, how would you compare those two? Like, if they did have to ever go toe-to-toe one day, like, say, an incursion happened, do you see them as comparable? Do you see one as superior? Or do you not really think about it?
Well, they're not comparable at all in what they represent or what they are as characters. I mean, they're not opposite exactly, but kind of. Like, I mean, because Hulk is not a villain, but Superman represents. Okay, writing Superman kind of carries this philosophical weight of, like, if you're telling a story that you're making a statement about what humanity is capable of, what mankind's potential is as far as virtue. And, is it possible for us to have absolute power and wield it with absolute humility and compassion? Like, he represents an absolute aspirational version of what mankind can be. For one, it's one is when you're telling a story about Superman, it's about showing how amazingly powerful he is, balanced against how much he cares for the most insignificant things of people. In my very first Superman story, he talks about Clark Kent writes an op-ed about, just tells like basically a little biography of this old man who died, a homeless guy who died as Clark was holding his hand, that he knew and knew his story. A guy that any one of us would blow right by on the street and kind of ignore, or give him a few bucks and never think about him anymore. And Clark knew where that guy came from and holds him in the highest regard. He writes this big article in the Daily Planet. It was like New York Times. Holding him up on this pedestal, like showing us who we're all supposed to be. Like, that man was somebody that we're all supposed to aspire to be like. He's the guy that, blows up the big bad guy tank and picks up flies down, catches the cars, and falls off the bridge and sets it down, and opens up the back seat and checks on the kids in the back, and congratulates them for having their seatbelts on. He's that guy. The power is only there to illustrate how, what a beautiful soul he is and how incorruptible he is. The other side, the Hulk story, is you're just reveling in that power. Hulk doesn't know anybody anything. Hulk just wants to be left alone. It's all about just reveling in that power, and doesn't even feel the need to use it until somebody pushes him around, and then he lets it all go. And it's just this huge, violent power fantasy,
With both characters broken down, let's get into who I believe would win if Superman was forced to fly off and confront true form Pennywise. Before we come to this conclusion, hit the like button if you haven't already, subscribe if you haven't already, and keep an eye on my community tab. I post daily, but I also post on my community tab daily, where I put really fun polls like, what would happen if these two clashed? Now, getting into this battle, I think this is a fantastic what if, because you could make the argument Pennywise is pound for pound the strongest being Superman has actively fought against. Him going up against a Pennywise that's beyond stories, infinitely transcends narratives, the concept of size, all these things. For him to be that illogically in the high outer, he's easily one of the strongest Supermans ever encountered, if not the strongest. However, that brings up probably the funniest part of this matchup in a sick way. You see, even if you argue Pennywise is stronger, which he very well may be, There is such an easy argument to make that Superman himself is an insane counter to the being of Pennywise. You see, Pennywise struggles most with concepts he's not as familiar with and ones that really go beyond his scope of reasoning. One of those includes hope. The hope of children, the imagination of children, that pure hope of things like the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny and all that. Superman represents all that and more. He is the hope of all beings in the multiverse. He goes beyond the rational, that even in the face of absolute nothingness, absolute void, the absolute end, he is still the beacon of hope. He is the embodiment of true hope within the storytelling and creation of DC Comics, something that power can even extend to the Overvoid. I do believe that even if he is not necessarily as strong as Pennywise, he might be a little weaker. Maybe you can get a cosmological, layer above for Penny. This ultimately is nullified by the fact that Superman can overcome greater obstacles, greater powerhouses than himself, because he is above power. He is the symbol of hope, the container of hope, the vessel of hope. He is everything hope is. And because of that, he is a hard counter to Pennywise, and I believe in confronting him, while this may be his greatest battle he's ever had to overcome, in the end, he would overcome Pennywise, the one who eats, because he is hope. And for that, I give the nod to Superman, highest of difficulty. But anyways, guys, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Who do you think wins between these two? What did you think of my breakdown, and what other spooky battles should I do throughout this month? Let me know. And anyways, it's your boy Jobbers and Goons. I'll see y'all later. Peace.